it, but Miami and everybody else did. Palm Beach, Florida. And I'm originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Any cheeseheads? Really? All right. So I've always, as far back as I can remember, I was a bird lover, and I loved wild birds, and put up the bird feeders and the bird houses, and tried to get all the wild birds to come to my house. And then in the late 70s, my parents got tired of the Midwest snow in Wisconsin and took us 5 kids and moved us to Washington State in the middle of December, actually. We drove across the country. That spring, in Washington State, my dad bought a bunch of little Rhode Island red chicks and some Cornish cross from our local feed store. And I thought, who needs wild birds when you can have your own? So that spring we did the whole nasty Cornish cross, grow them up and butcher them and so forth. How many of you raised those birds? Okay, you're gonna, all right. So, and then that was the beginning of my poultry hobby in a sense for me. And so then for the next few years I raised kind of the backyard, barnyard, that's a pretty chicken, and if I drove by a farm on my bike, I would like, that's a pretty chicken, I want to go see if they maybe sell that chicken. And so I just kind of did this hodgepodge of chickens. I never knew there was anything as a standard bred poultry or a purebred or a heritage bird. And so, but then some guy came to my house to buy eggs, and he also, at that time, I was selling some laying hens, and he came to my place and wanted to buy some of the laying hens, and he said, hey Jim, did you know, and I was probably maybe 14, 15, he said, there's this thing called exhibition poultry, and you can like enter them in the fair, and you can win prizes and money and plaques and all. And I'm like, really? He's like, so he traded me some laying hens. In exchange, he gave me some Cochin bantams. Anybody have heard of a Cochin chicken? All right, a few of you. All right, and they're a little puffball, just a great little chicken. Well, I entered them at the Clark County Fair in Vancouver, Washington, and I won grand champion. And so ever since then, I've just been like hooked on the birds. And then it was during, at that time I got hooked up with a great 4-H club, and very indebted to my 4-H parents. Louise is still alive. Dave's been gone for about 9 or 10 years, my 4-H leader. He loved the birds as much as us 4-H kids, and we traveled all over the Pacific Northwest and Northern California and Idaho, Oregon, Washington, going to poultry shows. And I just fell in love with exhibiting and breeding, and because I was invested into by a great 4-H leader and other breeders that I grew up around in the Pacific Northwest. So one of my kind of goals as a young person, I saw these judges flying all over the country. They'd come from Ohio out to Eugene, Oregon, and from California and other places they'd fly, and I thought, I'd love to be a judge. And so that was one of my childhood aspirations, and in 1994, I got licensed by the American Poultry Association and the American Bantam Association, and since then I've judged in probably 35 of the 50 states. I've judged in Australia 5 different times, and I bet some of you want to become a judge now. So really about 25 years of being one of you in raising small flocks in the backyard. Well, about, 7, 8 years ago, I went to work. I left the backyard groupies, and I moved over into what we would call the commercial industry. And I went to work for a very large turkey company in California. It's called Diestel Turkey Ranch. We raised about 1 million turkeys a year. And the reason I was so excited about it is because it would be natural and organic. That's what we were growing. I'm like, cool, they're going to do it the natural way, and they're going to be organic. And I had all kinds of ideas in my mind of what that looked like or what that meant. And so I went to work for that company, and my job as a field supervisor was to make sure that I was supervising 5 ranches, and those 5 ranches each had a ranch manager So as a supervisor, I'd work with the ranch manager to make sure that all of our employees were raising turkeys the diesel way. And those 5 farms I supervised raised about 400,000 of those birds a year. Okay? The longer I worked with the company, the more I was exposed to what happens in the commercial poultry world, both chicken and turkey. I was really disturbed by it. And like one of the things that just kind of blew me away is that even the all the turkey, we did it from beginning to end at this particular company. We hatched them, we bred them, we brooded them, and we built our own processing plant. They built their own feed mill. Now keep in mind, a million turkeys, the largest turkey producer in California was Foster Farms. They do about 16 million turkeys a year. So we were kind of a little guy. But one of the things that really shocked me was that none of our turkeys could naturally reproduce. Everything was done by artificial insemination. And so we would take some of you guys, women usually didn't get into this, but we would take and train a group of guys who would spend 8 to 10 hours collecting semen from the toms. But the next day they would be inseminating the hens. All right? Now, in case you didn't know this, the entire turkey industry in the United States, actually, well, I'll just say North America, none of the birds, butterball, Pilgrim's Pride, none of those birds can naturally reproduce. The turkey, okay? And we'll talk a little bit about in this session about why is that, okay? Because so, anyways, to finish a little bit of the introduction here, so you kind of see the platform of where we're going. After a few years of doing that and seeing some of the welfare issues and things that really concern me, I spent the last 3 or 4 years on the road educating. Doing a lot with cooperative extension. Some doors have opened up with Cal Poly, Central Coast of California, and a number of farming organizations around the country that I get the opportunity to teach. And so about 3 years ago, I think it's starting to become a blur now, I was actually in Western North Carolina teaching a poultry workshop on heritage poultry. And the guy that organized the whole thing, actually Jennifer, was at that first meeting. I remember that. It was in those wooden bleachers. Isampa, that's right. And so they organized the whole thing, and they put me up at the Hampton Inn in Marion, North Carolina. So if you go home that way, Interstate 40, exit 85, look to your left. There is the Hampton Inn, and they made housing arrangements for me there. And I went and checked in, and Melissa, my wife, was working at the front counter. Now, I was living in California at the time, and now I'm married to her, and I live in Western North Carolina. So she's been saying lately, she says, oh yeah, I checked him in, and he checked me out. So I am, and since then, there's a lot of really exciting things. You talk about local and sustainable farming. There's a lot happening in North Carolina, and we're working really hard to establish breeding flocks of some of the old heritage breeds of poultry. And so in your note, if you would turn, the first subject is the importance of identifying standard bred poultry and or heritage birds. This is going to be the foundation of the day and the foundation of the weekend if you choose to attend some of the other poultry classes in the track. Okay? So the importance of identifying these birds. Okay? First thing I want to do, and definitely going to be some things that you're going to hear from Harvey and from Pat and myself that you will want to write down. I hope that kind of, or have a pen or whatever. First of all, let me identify for you what is the definition of a heritage chicken. All right? Now, as you go through the day, through the weekend, remember, standard bred poultry and heritage poultry can be interexchanged, and I'll explain that to you. But when you hear me say standard bred chicken or a heritage chicken, there is some crossover there, and I'll clarify that right now. So 4 ways that you identify a heritage chicken or a standard bred bird. Number 1 is it has to be APA bred. Okay, APA stands for the American Poultry Association. And let me just explain it to you. Any of you ever seen the Poultry Bible? I know that, what's her name there in the back? Because she got it in the mail finally, and she opened it like,
with me.
Sheila, you have yours too?
Yes, I do.
Oh, good. All right. So, this is called the Standard of Perfection. It's published by the American Poultry Association. And the American Poultry Association is the largest, or excuse me, the oldest livestock organization in the United States. I have one of the original copies of the standard. I normally carry it with me, but I forgot to bring this one. But it's 100 years old, one of the copies of the standard. And what the American Poultry Association does is it publishes this book, and it has over 360 plus different breeds and varieties of chickens, ducks, geese, turkeys, and just recently in the 2010 edition of the standard, they added the lovely guineas. All right? Who's any guinea people in here? You're all weirdos. No, I'm just kidding. Those guineas are good watchdogs, aren't they? Yeah. So when we say a standard bred chicken or a heritage chicken, we're talking about birds that are identified by the American Poultry Association. Okay? Part of their mission, or a significant part of what they do, is to make sure that if it's a Rhode Island Red or a Plymouth Rock or a New Hampshire, that the bird is being bred and judged and presented according to what the Standard of Perfection teaches. Okay, so it has to be APA. All right, I'll pass this around and you can take a look at it and enjoy that. Secondly is, write this down. The bird has to be able to naturally mate. That's number 2. All right. Now, before I went to work for the turkey company, I'm like, well, of course. Well, that's kind of a no-brainer. All right. Of course, it should be able to naturally mate. But if it's a heritage bird, now let me tell you also that there are breeds of chickens that we call them hybrids. All right, well, I'm going to come back to that. Started down the wrong trail there. Thirdly, long, productive outdoor lifespan. Okay? Number 1, it's APA bred. Number 2, natural made. Number 3, long, productive outdoor lifespan. Now you'd say, well, of course. Okay? Let me just tell you, write this down, that a good, productive, true to the breed hen should produce for you from 5 to 7 years. Okay? The male bird should produce 3 to 5 years. Now you may say, I have a Rhode Island Red at my house that produced for about 14 months and she's been in retirement ever since. Okay? There's a reason for that, and I'll explain that to you. Okay? So they need to have a long, productive outdoor lifespan. Fourth thing is what we call slow growth rate. Okay? Let me talk Cornish cross chicken for a minute. All right? Cornish cross chicken, on the average, we're killing those birds. Excuse me. Processing, butchering, which term should I use today? All right? Well, I'll use processing because I'm kind of used to that. On the average, we process a Cornish cross chicken at 42 days old. I mean, it's still a chick in a sense. All right? A heritage bird, okay? We don't even consider processing all of your old historical breeds, the Delaware, the New Hampshire, the Barred Rock, all of our dual-purpose breeds of chickens, and I'll show you some photos here in a minute. They need a minimum of 16 weeks. So when I say slow growth rate, the chickens, minimum of 16 weeks, turkeys, a minimum of 24 to 28 weeks. Okay? Now, turkeys, on the average, turkey is being processed anywhere from 12 to 14 weeks, depending on which company, which line of hybrid turkey that you're dealing with. Okay? A true heritage turkey, a bourbon red, a Narragansett, a bronze, they need at least 24 to 28 weeks. Now, I'm not going to go too far down this trail, but I want you to understand something. Write this down somewhere in your notes. Time always increases flavor on a bird. Okay? So, what most of us, especially my generation, we grew up on a Cornish cross chicken. We've never known anything any different. So if I butchered a Buckeye or one of the old heritage breeds of chickens, and I cooked it for you. First of all, you got to cook it totally different. Just ask your grandmother or your great-grandmother. All their recipes are what we need back to cook these old historical breeds of chickens, okay, and turkeys. But if I cooked it for you, the texture and everything about the bird would be totally different compared to a 42-day-old bird that hasn't had time to grow muscle and have a lot more time for nutrients to be in the bird. Okay? That's what we mean by slow growth rate. Okay? Now, let me talk to you, just because this is really, really important, about the industrial side of birds. Just some, I got 5 bullet points just to help you understand the differences between industrial birds and a true to the standard heritage bird. Okay? So the disadvantages of commercial kinds of chickens and turkeys. Number one, they cannot, just remember, they cannot naturally reproduce. All right? Now, I'm talking turkeys primarily, but I also want to tell you with chickens. All right? First of all, the Cornish cross chicken, it was created to be grown in confinement. Okay? Now, you're gonna know where I stand right at the beginning, and it'll flow through the entire weekend, is we have these movements of these pasture poultry movements of people, oh yeah, I raise all these Cornish cross and Freedom Rangers, and I can tell you things about the Freedom Rangers, but see, they put these birds out to pasture, and actually a Cornish cross, one of the most mean things you can do to a Cornish cross is put it out to pasture, because the bird was invented to be grown in confinement. They eat, sleep, and poop. That's what they do. They don't move around much. Okay? They weren't bred to move around. But even, and so they were bred to die. They were bred to, you know, they were created to be able to grow fast. All right? And actually, I was at the research center for NC State within the last few months, and he said, Jim, actually they're aiming, even for there's like the crosses of these Cornish crosses, like 30 some different crosses. And but what I was going to say is, if you grow Cornish cross up and you take the male and the female, first of all, because they grow so fast and they have all kinds of issues, they can sort of maybe kind of mate, but if they did, their offspring would not be a Cornish cross. Okay? All the genetics of Cornish cross chickens in the world now are owned by 3 companies. 2 of those companies are not in the United States. The third company is called Cobb, which is owned by a company that maybe you've heard of called Tyson. Okay? They own all those genetics. And they're very, very smart by owning these lines. I'll tell you why. Because when you go to the feed store or you order these groups of chicks that come in from like Mount Healthy Hatchery or whatever, and you get these chicks, all right? You can't naturally reproduce those, and they don't want you to, because they want you to keep going back to them to be able to have to buy chicks.